What's up, world? Here, well, almost not here for another episode of Dreamchasers. Excited to be back with Dr. Lauren Wright today. And for those of you who do not know, Dreamchasers is a show I created about a year back now that brings people from all walks of life on the road to turning their dreams into reality, to share insights, advice, and inspire other people to keep chasing their dreams. I'm really excited to have Lauren on the show. She just finished writing her book on behalf of the president, graduated with a PhD from Georgetown, is the director of investor relationships at NV5, and is also a part of the White House Transition Project board. So Lauren's got a lot of awesome credentials, and we're going to have a great conversation with you guys. So get your notepads ready, and we're going to roll our sleeves up. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. It's definitely a pleasure to connect. So, this new book that you got on behalf of the president, why don't you start by telling people, what's it about?
It's about the expanding communications role of first ladies in the last 3 presidential administrations. And it just really shows that they're not strictly behind the scenes advisors, which you've probably been hearing a lot on the news lately. They actually have a measurable impact on public opinion of the president, and the White House and presidential campaigns have come to really rely on them to send messages to the public and relate to the public in a way that other elected officials can't. So it just talks about how central they are to those efforts, and even talks about election 2016. So there's something interesting in there for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating when I was reading the book that you sent over to me. There's just so many factors that you don't think about when you look at politics, especially with the first ladies, and like how big of an impact they really have on politics in America.
Yeah, it's tremendous. And actually, one thing a lot of people are surprised to learn is that they speak in public more often than vice presidents. And that's been the case in most of the years in the last 3 administrations. And they're more effective than vice presidents, and sometimes even presidents themselves, at vouching for the character of the president or candidate, or promoting policy even. There's some evidence that they're more effective, and I show that through survey experiments. But I think what makes the book unique is that it's really hardcore empirical research, but it's digestible for general audiences, and it's of course on a topic that a lot of Americans find interesting. So I hope I'm sort of hitting a sweet spot there, especially as we enter election season and finish it up.
Yeah, definitely. Well, why don't you talk about what compelled you to write the book?
So it actually did start at Georgetown while I was doing my doctoral research. I took a presidency course with someone named Steve Wayne, who is a student of Newstat, who's a really famous presidency scholar. And there's a famous picture of JFK reading his books, and probably presidents haven't read political science books in a long time, but they did read this advisor's book. So he did 1 week on first ladies and the vice president, which is so strange, and it was so striking to me that you can cover the academic material in 1 week of time, because there's so little academic research on the president's spouse, and what little there is dominated by historians who kind of categorize them, and they'll say we have modern spouses, we have traditional spouses, we have active and passive spouses. But I approach everything from a data analysis perspective, from a numbers place. And I thought, well, let me just count how many times they appear in public, and we can see what they're doing and how often they're doing it. And I was so surprised to see that they appear in public more than most other politicians. So I thought, I really have something here. And it became my dissertation topic. I spent pretty much my last 2 full years at Georgetown just working on this topic. And I really didn't want to write something for my dissertation that would sort of sit on a shelf in a library and no one would ever read. So I think the key was that I really wrote it to be a book that would eventually be published. That was really important to me. And so I took it really seriously from the beginning. And I would encourage anyone listening who's involved in any kind of academic study to just take whatever you're working on seriously, and it could become something that's published or become something that you can't even imagine it could become. So papers are not just papers, they can be books, they can be articles. And that was what led me to this place for sure.
So like walk me through that moment when it went from like dissertation to becoming a real book, because I can imagine that must have been kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a challenging moment, unless you just knew like, hey, I have to make this a book.
You know, it was actually a little bit of a struggle because the topic itself in political science is sort of marginalized, and people think the First Lady is a fluffy topic. They think it's not really that important, and this isn't an elected position. So people think it's sort of a waste of time to go that direction with methodological research that's quantitative in nature. And so the first step was I had to get people to sign off on the topic. And I got so many people who said no and said, this might tarnish your reputation. You really want to write about something that's perceived to be more serious in nature. And so that was the first hurdle. But then when I did get a really great group of professors on my team, and a couple of them were from the policy school, so they had witnessed firsthand how sometimes political actors who are not perceived to be at the center of the action really make a big impact. And so they signed off on it. And when I ultimately defended my dissertation, fast forwarding a lot, I think it was sort of unheard of that someone who had just graduated from a PhD program could land a book deal. But I really hustled and I talked to people who had done it, and I found an agent, and that agent was able to shop my manuscript around to lots of different publishers. I had to make the decision whether I wanted it to be a mainstream trade book or more of an academic book. And I picked Prager because it's a niche where they combine scholarly content with general audiences marketing, and they make it marketable to the whole world. So I worked hard, and there were definitely some hurdles to overcome at the beginning and at every stage.
Yeah, well, talk more about like what that hustle looked like. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are probably in the same boat as you, or having to go the self-publishing route, which is a whole nother story in itself. And they're kind of wondering like, well, what do I do if I don't have those resources, or kind of have to do what you did, which is basically make your own track, because not everyone's on board with you.
Yeah, you just have to find people that do believe in the idea, and you have to do the cold calls and the cold emails, and you do hundreds of those types of things. And for anyone who's trying to get buy-in for their idea, it's just, you have to reach out to so many different people. And luckily, I found a historian at Wake Forest, who's now the dean of the college. She sort of took me under her wing and mentored me, and she explained to me the process by which academics can go into commercial publishing. And I found this list of agents, literally, and you can find them online, top literary agents for whatever topic you're writing about. And I cold emailed them if I could find an email address, and you pitch them your book. And half of them didn't get back to me. A couple said they weren't interested, and a couple said they were. And so then you find the couple of firms that are interested, and you talk to them, and you pick the best one. And it's the exact same process with publishers, because once you get an agent to represent you, and again, this is just my experience, they go through the process of cold contacting those publishers. And so some thought my book was not interesting. Some thought it was interesting. Some had already bought a book about first ladies. It's a really hot topic right now. And so then you again go through the process of finding the right fit. So it's multiple stages of lots of rejection and a couple exciting acceptances. And you just have to reach out to a lot of people, and you have to ask for help. I mean, I think one of the most uncomfortable things for anyone who is at the beginning of their career is to reach out to someone and say, can I talk to you about this project I'm working on? But if you don't do that, then there's no conversation, and you don't make the important connection. So you have to almost be shameless in your asking for help from potential mentors or people who are doing what you want to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And that goes for cold calling, talking to anyone, because no matter where you are in the that fear never goes away. I mean, I hear that all the time from very successful people who say, well, I'm still scared when I get on the phone and I'm calling someone who's a big kahuna. For me, I just do it. And I think that is the difference between the people who are able to actually do it and get through the failure that is happening, because eventually, like you experienced, you're going to get some yeses. It's just about, kind of dealing with that feeling in your stomach and all the kind of thoughts that are going around in your head, and just going for it, because that's what it takes.
Exactly. And something I think that's difficult to remember, but it always helps me, is, you care more about your idea and the way you present yourself than anyone else does. Most people are thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about your thing and thinking, oh, she's really being solicitous, or she's really going out on a limb by asking me for this favor. People don't think that much about you. You think a lot about you. And so I think it's important not to go down the rabbit hole of the negative thoughts and worrying about presenting yourself too much. I mean, obviously it's important to be professional, but those irrational thoughts can kill you, and you have to try to beat them back with whatever strength you can muster.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk more about the cold emails that you would send out to these individuals. What did those look like, and what would you share with someone about how they should be creating those emails now, kind of having gone through that process?
I would say it's important to keep an email short. If you've never talked to the person before, the paragraphs and paragraphs, I get emails like that too now. I think that's tough for someone to wade through. You want to have your idea in the subject line or in the first sentence. And then if you were referred by someone else, ask them, well, do you mind if I use your name when I'm reaching out to this person? And if you can do that, I think it's always better to make some kind of personal connection if you can.
For sure, that makes sense. So talk about some of the bigger hurdles for you when you were in the process of actually writing the book. Did you experience any of the typical writer's block? Walk us through that.
I mean, I think everybody who writes suffers from writer's block. I think if there's a group of professional writers who don't, it's probably journalists. And my fiance was a journalist at the Washington Post for many years, but they they have such a fine-tuned muscle where they can get something out quickly. And so you have to be thinking about that. You have to put something on the page. And if you're stuck on a particular portion or a particular idea, I think go back to your outline. Outlining is really important, and work on a part that you feel like working on. If you set that day aside to get a certain chapter started or finished, but you don't, but you're struggling getting started on it, or you don't want to work on that particular part, move on to a different part of the book. Just keeping moving and honoring the commitment to yourself to get a certain amount done every day is really important. You have to keep that promise to yourself and keep on the schedule, that even if it's self-imposed, I think it's important to get something done every day. And if you don't want to write, maybe do interviews or schedule an interview or get organized. And, a book project is such a Herculean thing. There's always something to work on. So work on something every day, even if it's not all day, and even if it's not the part that you set out to work on.
Got it. So what do you think was the hardest part of, I guess, because now the book is about to be out, the book writing and then now publishing process for you?
Which was the hardest part of the publishing process?
Or I guess kind of the whole process.
I think early on, it's always difficult because you don't know if the book's even going to get published. And I think one of the best moments for me was when I signed a contract with a publisher, because until then, even when I talked to the editor and she was on board, and I talked to the marketing department and they were on board, it doesn't seem like you have anything set in stone. And that happens especially with the process of publishing. That goes on for many, many months, where someone verbally commits to you and then they don't get back for a couple weeks, and you think you have a deal, but you're not sure. So I'd say everything up to actually signing the contract was the most nerve-wracking for me. And that went on for probably 6 months, that entire process. And so that was really difficult. And then you get into the actual writing, where you realize that you have to make a lot of changes, and no dissertation is perfect, and most of them don't become books, but if they do, it's a process of years sometimes. And I really had about 6 to 9 months to turn my dissertation into a book, and it's a completely different project. There's new chapters added. A lot of things are reworked, and so they're not the same, but the process of turning one thing into another was really difficult too. It takes a lot of time and takes a lot of editorial skill.
I can only imagine. So how did you keep yourself sane?
I don't know if I did, Lucas. I don't know if I was successful at keeping myself sane. No, I mean, I think the whole mind, body, spirit approach is very helpful. You're not going to work very effectively if you're not taking care of yourself. And so I think, whenever I find myself stressed out, I have to just go back to working out and eating right. And the other things sometimes seem to fall into place. So I think you have to sleep and eat right and get outside when you can. Don't do the 2 to 3 day streak of sitting in your apartment and writing, because I've definitely done that, and it's not good for the mind.
I can totally relate to that. I mean, there's a certain level, always seems to be a common topic on this show, of insanity that you have to be able to deal with to pull something like this off, especially when you're in a situation like you're also working a job like me, and you're having to balance like multiple things that are going on in your head. And it's so hard to keep one of those bubbles from bursting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like almost normal to like, I guess, have that bubble burst. I mean, at least in my experience, I mean, that's why I pulled the plug on Dreamchasers for a short period of time. It's just like my bubble burst, and I like didn't know how to handle it. And, you know, if I had given it a few days, and like I've said millions of times on this show, like give yourself a few days, but like sometimes it's hard to follow, you know, your own advice and other people's advice. Cause it's just like, you know, when you're in the moment and in your head, that's just like a very lonely and scary place to be.
That's so true. It is scary sometimes. But, you know, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to do what you know you should do. I mean, I always hear, especially in conversations like this and in forums where people talk about their career path, there's this saying you should do everything you possibly could, but you're not always going to be able to attain that, because you can always send an email, you can always make another call, you can always write another page. And so I would say self-compassion is really important, even though, again, I'm not very good at this.
Me either.
But if you're your own advocate, then I think it's easier to approach challenges and overcome them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, another one of my guests on the show, Andrew Beimbrink, was also talking about that. He's like self-compassionate, man. I mean, that's one of the keys. That he's about 40 now. And so I wish I had known this early and earlier, because it's such a valuable insight for people, because the majority of us just treat ourselves like crap, even the successful people. And compassion is such a big deal, you know, especially for guys. I mean, I think you know, maybe I'm wrong on this, but like guys kind of have this picture of like, oh, we're showing ourselves compassion. That's soft, right? And I think it takes a pretty strong guy to, you know, be compassionate, because you have to be willing to let go of your ego. And that is the hardest part for me of the whole self-compassion thing, is like the ego that goes along with letting go of like everything's gonna be all right. I'm okay if I fail, that kind of thing. It's super interesting.
Yeah, and I would also just add that in the theme of keeping your commitments to yourself, one way I sort of toggle between my full-time job and my book project is I just set aside certain times of the day for certain things, and those have to be non-negotiables. Mm-hmm. So in the morning before I go to work, the book is my priority. If I can get in a 1 hour of lunchtime emails, again, that's time that's just for the book. And at night, again, you know, take a couple hours for yourself, but that's your work time. If you are in the kind of situation where you're doing something off hours, I think keeping a consistent schedule and being true to that schedule is a really good tip.
Yeah, you know, it's funny when you say that. Like the Rihanna and Drake song "Work" just comes in my head, because I can I know I can think about is like work, right? Like, because that's what it seems like, and it never stops. And that's one of the hardest parts of this process for me, is like keeping that momentum going is so hard, because you know, when things are going well, it's like easier and you feel like you're on fire. And then when it kind of catches up to you, or you start getting no's and you're like, it's Saturday and it's 11 o'clock and you just want to, you know, eat cereal and watch new Game of Thrones, like it seems so much more appealing than having to deal with like the I don't want to say it's soul wrenching, because it's not, but kind of the work of like getting yourself back in that mode, right? Because getting yourself in that mode is like, it's the key, and it's the hardest part as well.
Yep, it definitely is. And I would say that when you have a big win, take your breaks then, because you deserve it. If something good happens, you should take note of it and celebrate it. And those are the best times, I think, to reward yourself. But, you know, it is work, especially if you have a project in addition to another job you have. And that really doesn't come with a lot of luxuries. You can't be going out when your friends are going out. You can't be doing some of the things maybe you used to do when you only had one job. The only way a project moves itself forward, if you're solely responsible for it, is if you work when other people aren't working. And I think that's so important. And if you're in that situation, you should celebrate it and not feel like you're missing out on something, because you're pursuing what you want to do. And there's nothing more rewarding than that at the end of the day.
So was there anything that you did when you had those moments to kind of check yourself? Because I'm sure you had those thoughts where you had friends who were going out, or things that you wanted to do, and you kind of had to like get yourself to kind of be like, all right, I'm like in this moment right now, I'm going to focus. Like, what did you do to like get you back in that zone specifically?
You just have to remember to stay in your lane. And so my lane right now is I work hard every day and every night and every weekend that I possibly can. And, those people just aren't maybe in that time of their life right now. Also, I'm new now to the world of social media, because when I was doing my doctoral work and writing the book, I went off of it completely because I didn't want to see other people taking these amazing vacations and doing all these fun things when I was honestly, and honest to God, I was at home working my tail off every night until 2 a.m. some nights to get the book done. And that was my lane. So I just stayed in my lane and kept my focus. And then when you hit a deadline or someone gives you a big yes or a big leg up, that I think those are the times to take a few days off. For sure.
No, for sure. That's awesome advice. And social media is just such a great segue from what what we're talking about, because it's such a tricky thing. Like self-promotion, especially in our boats, of trying to get your voice heard, is the biggest challenge that there is at the beginning, because we're both trying to build audiences that are going to ultimately like pay to hear us or purchase from us or anything like that.
It's definitely a double-edged sword. But if you believe in the idea and promoting the idea, that is, to me, so much more desirable than strictly self-promotion. Because for me, I just remember that we're entering an election season and people are still largely thinking about first ladies as these political actors who stay behind the scenes and bake cookies and wait next to their husbands on the podium. And so to me, the idea that you should take this person really seriously because they're going to be bearing most of the messaging burden. You're going to see their face on TV more than any other political actor once they're elected. And they're sometimes the only persuasive person on the roster. I want my book to change the way people think about that. And that to me is really important. And I think that's a lot more digestible to me than self-promotion for the sake of self-promotion. And, it's exactly like your podcast, which I think is just such a great idea. And to get people who are sort of on the cusp of achieving their dreams or about to hit it big is, I think, a really interesting niche you've identified. And you have to believe in the idea of that. It's not really about you even,
Yeah, I totally agree. And, what it comes down to is having the right mindset for doing that. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you focus on your message and how it's going to help people, and kind of that mindset of like, how can I be of service to everyone else? It kind of takes away that self-promotional feel that any kind of social media or I guess, sales work can have when you're doing something like this, because that's the way that you're really going to reach people. So you have to kind of, to connect our points, shift that mindset from being self-promotional and knowing like you do have to do it. I mean, you have to be, don't be afraid to do it. And what helps that is to come from this mindset of you're doing it for other people, you're doing it to spread the message. And that's ultimately where you're going to start to have the most success. And I say start, right? Because this isn't like, you make a few tweets and all of a sudden you're Gary Vaynerchuk with all these followers, and people like Gary did it for like God knows how many years, and like Lauren, how many, long nights just grinding, right? So, more so it's about focusing on that process to keep going, rather than, all the pretty things that we want, like vacations, raises, etc.
I think that's exactly right. You have to remind yourself that this is your beginning or your middle, and you might be comparing it to someone else's end, which is a completely unfair psychological exercise to put yourself through. So if you're at the beginning, acknowledge that you're at the beginning, and acknowledge that everyone has to start somewhere. And I would also just add, there is a practical element to promotion. If no one knows my book exists, they're certainly not going to read it. So, that right. You have to get something off the ground for the purpose of people consuming it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a necessary condition of having any successful product.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, I mean, where can the people find your book?
Oh, well, you can find it on the publisher's website. It's Prager.com, and they have a great search function, or on Amazon or any other ebook site that you'd use to order. You can get it if you go to your local bookstore. They can order it for you. Barnes and Noble could order it for you, certainly. So there's lots of different ways.
It's on your website too, right?
Yep, it's laurenawright.com, and that'll link to the publisher's site where you can buy the book. Okay,
yeah. Well, for everyone who's listening, I'm going to link to Lauren's book in the show notes on the website. So schoolofdreams.co. Again, that's schoolofdreams.co. And yes, it is hilarious that we are .co. Just was the address that I picked, and it might be associated with something in the middle of the UK. Hey, yeah, whatever works. So Lauren, to kind of wrap things up here, what insight, and this isn't just about like publishing, kind of life, career in general, whatever works for you, do you know now that you would share with your younger self?
Well, I'm still going through it. And again, I think that's the great part of the show, is I'm still tackling all of these issues that we're discussing, because it's my first book and I've never done this before. So I'm learning all the time, and I don't purport to be an expert on any of these themes but I'd say be compassionate, and just remember how much worrying doesn't help produce an outcome. And that's something I always think about, is if I sit here and I ruminate on this and the worst case scenario, and I start thinking catastrophically, how will that help me get what I want? And the answer is always that it doesn't. So, stop the ruminations, try to be compassionate to yourself, do things that are really good for your psychological health and for your physical well-being, and try to enjoy the process, because so many things that are just starting to happen to me. I'm going on local TV a lot, starting small, but going on some bigger shows here soon, getting to schedule book events. Those are things that I couldn't even imagine happening when I was wondering if a publisher was even going to pick up my project. And so I try to check in and remind myself, you should have fun with these events that are coming up. You should have fun talking to people about your book, because I mean, what an unbelievable opportunity. So if you don't really relish in the moment, I think that you're costing yourself something. And it's important to remind yourself to stay positive.
Oh yeah, totally. And like the whole like be a beginner as long as you can is like resonating very clearly from what you're saying. It's really hard, like especially when you're putting in a lot of work at the beginning. You know, you're 6 months, you're a year in, and you know, you want things to happen so fast, and to like every day kind of remind yourself that, you know, you're in it for the process and that you are a beginner. I think that's what is the most helpful thing you can do, because, you know, if you're just focused on the end goal and, you know, how am I going to get there? This is going to be a pain in the butt for you, because you have to just be the beginner, be in the process, and just keep working, and you'll get there a lot faster than if you're just constantly, you know, expecting big things to happen, and, you know, carrying that weight of always, you know, when's the next thing going to happen to me?
Mm-hmm. And I think trivializing the successes you've already had is such a terrible thing to do to yourself also. And I'm definitely a victim of this, is you want something and then it happens and you say, well, you know, everybody can do that. Let me do this next thing.
Right.
You know, it's really insane, but you have to try not to do that, because every time you accomplish a goal that you set out to accomplish, that is a huge achievement. And it's hard not to fall into the trap of, okay, well, what's next? And I certainly do that too. I mean, the other day I was thinking, well, now I'm going to publish another book, and let me think about where that's going to go and what that's going to be about. And I'm already thinking about what's next. But I have such a long haul, and my book's not even, this book isn't even out yet. So,
right.
You know, it's really important to not get on that assembly line and think of what's coming next, because you're right. When you stay in the moment, that's the time when you really connect with people the best.
No, yeah, I really agree. Those are awesome insights. And the book officially drops April 31st.
April 30th. Yep.
April 30th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so don't go buy Drake's Views from the Six. Go buy Lauren's book.
Thank you, Lucas.
All right, yeah, of course, you got it. Thanks again, Lauren. It was awesome to have you on the show. Everyone, you know, go check out schoolofdreams.co for a link to her book, and it was a pleasure as always, Lauren.
It's a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Not everyone knows we're classmates. We used to go to high school together.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot to mention that. I guess shout out to your sister Stephanie. What's up? Who also went to high school with us. I mean, it's kind of funny, just like the, you know, it's a small world. You know, you never know where any of the connections are going to lead. Like I've known you guys since third grade. Like your sister and I came into Parker at the same time, and to think we're sitting here and you have a book that's about to be released and I'm running a podcast, it's wild. It's wild.
It is, but it's all fun and really great. Great to see you, and always great to talk to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everyone, Dream Chaser Nation, keep doing your thing, and talk to y'all soon.